Hi students, so this video is video 4 in how to write a magical realism story. And this one is going to talk to you about how to write the climax to your story. Now, if you think of the magical realism stories that we've read so far, each of them has a very different climax that kind of occurs at different parts in the story. So if you think of Firebug, for instance, the climax occurs when she's running through the parking lot, scared that she's essentially going to catch everything on fire, and eventually the bus blows up. That's the most exciting part of the story when readers are thinking, what's going to happen? What's going to happen? If you remember, this climax happens very close to the end of the story, where after the climax, it immediately falls into the following action and resolution within one paragraph. So some stories are going to be very front heavy, where the rising action is the longest part of the story. However, you have other stories, such as the Columber, where the climax happens when the protagonist goes out into the sea to speak to the shark. After he speaks to the shark, which is when the readers are asking, what's going to happen? Is the shark going to eat him? What's going to happen? We then have the following action where the shark offers him the pearl, and then the protagonist is very upset, and then they later find his skeleton holding the pearl, and we reach our resolution where our political critique occurs. So with this one, the following action and the resolution is a little longer. So depending on the story, your climax, your following action, and your resolution can happen a little earlier in your story or at the very end. It's ultimately up to you and how you want your story to unfold. With this story that we've been working with, the climax resolution, or the climax, following action, and resolution happen really quickly. The story is primarily rising action. So let's take a look at how this story ends up. So with the last video, it got cut off, so I'm going to backtrack just a little, and we ended reading here. So we're going to start here, and this is actually still part of the rising action, but I'm going to read it, and then it's going to go into the climax. So it reads, Leaf and I took to sitting in our separate lawn chairs, one blue and one tan. We waited out in the field amongst the dogs and cats and cows and deers and other assortments of animals. We placed bets on which of our chairs would vanish first. We wondered when the money that we were betting might vanish. The days dissolved around us. People worried the world would vanish beneath their feet, or their skin would evaporate from their muscles. So it was a comforting moment in the midst of chaos when the color green went missing. Stoplights were rendered useless with yellow, red, and green gone. The green material in my flannel shirt left, leaving blocks of brown material to flutter around my body. The green astroturf in football stadiums ran off. Yet the comfort was that the real grass outside stayed. The grass in the fields and the leaves on the trees, they stayed. The green flower pots on the porch vanished, but the green plants in them continued on. And so this was a comfort, that the world was fine. It was just everything we had put into the world that was ultimately doomed. So this would be the end of our rising action. The mention of this word doom leads into the climax because the reader is going to wonder, well, what's going to happen to the world? Is it doomed? So this is the most intense part of the story where everyone's saying, what's going to happen? What's going to happen? Now, you're going to note that with this climax, it is not as exciting, for instance, as the Firebug climax. Some climaxes actually have explosions in them. Some climaxes are going to be a little quieter, such as The Man with Enormous Wings, where the climax is just the angel flying away. So don't feel as though that your climax needs to have an explosion, though it most certainly could. That just depends on the kind of story you're writing. So let's take a look at the climax of this story. It reads, As human creations reduced to tones of gray and black and white, when both Leaf and I had lost our lawn chairs and our clothes, when people had finally taken to the woods and beaches and hills and fields, that was when all of humanity's hard work really began to crumble. So we notice in here, it's kind of shifting over time. All the colors are gone except for gray and black and white. And people have left their homes because it's become too dangerous and are now living in the woods and beaches and hills and fields. Notice this writer's syntax. Instead of putting commas, the author uses and, and a lot. Why might she do that? The author uses multiple ands to kind of create this emphasis on the words in between the ands. The only colors remaining are gray and black and white. So it emphasizes each of the words. When you put commas, words tend to kind of blend together in a list. This separates each of them. So it also emphasizes that people are now living in the woods and on the beaches and in the hills and in the fields. And so it emphasizes each one. So feel free to kind of play around with your writing as long as it's intentional and works well. So now we start to really worry because all of humanity's hard work is beginning to crumble. So what's going to happen? Next it reads, as the different shades of gray departed from the earth, skyscrapers and cities collapsed into debris, only for that debris to later vanish completely. Eventually the roads were gone, and the water pipes were gone, and electrical wires were gone, and everything we had come to depend upon was gone. So again, here we see the emphasis. The roads are gone, and the water pipes are gone, and the electrical wires were gone, and everything that we've depended upon is gone. So it's emphasizing all these things that have disappeared that we depend upon on a daily basis. And note, it also uses the transition eventually. And it uses it again here. Then, eventually, the world became safe again. There was nothing left to crumble or collapse or fall or crush. It was just the world and the living creatures on it. Everything had been wiped clean. So, as I mentioned before, this climax is not very intense. It's a quieter climax like that of the very old man with enormous wings. The way that you write your climax to your story is up to you, but know that you have a lot of options. However, ultimately, it should be the part of your story that causes readers to ask, what is going to happen? And in this case, what happens is that all the things we depend upon disappears, and the only thing that's left is the living creatures on Earth. So that is the climax. In the climax, it's using a great deal of plentitude, which you should feel. Your climax should be very descriptive. If you think about all the stories that we read in class, there's a ton of description in that part of the story. So make sure that you're using a lot of imagery and symbolism. This is where your political critique should start becoming clear. This final sentence, everything had been wiped clean except for the living creatures. We can tell that something's being criticized in there. So you want everything to come together. And so for here, we see the fantastical element at its most extreme, which therefore releases the plentitude because it's built up into this extreme imagery. And we also see the political critique. So make sure that your climax is a location where there's a great deal of magical elements at work. So this is the end of explaining the climax to the story. Your next video, which will be posted tomorrow, will explain both the falling action and the resolution. So do me a favor, after you're done watching this video, in an email or directly on the YouTube page, write a comment about one thing that you learned and how you will use it in your own story. All right, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you tomorrow.